the significance of the church is that the men who attended here were pretty influential. These were the men who were barbers, caterers, and so forth. And when the war broke out, April 12th was when Fort Sumter fell. The men met here, and they marched to the courthouse to volunteer to serve the Union cause. They were turned back because in Pennsylvania, blacks were not allowed to serve in the militia. But nevertheless, 2 years later, some of these men did join units. And you see the units here: 8th U.S. Colored Troop, 22nd U.S. Colored Troop. The 22nd, one of my mother's great uncles served in the 22nd. He's buried in Conestoga at the Conestoga AME Church. And then you have the 43rd, 25th, the 3rd. Altogether, there was a little over 320 African Americans from Lancaster County who fought in the Civil War. In doing a survey of them, I found the graves of 150 of them. They're buried in 34 cemeteries throughout the county. Here, there's a couple that are buried at Stevens, Greenland, which is down on Duke Street, at the Lancaster Cemetery, at Schweiner Cemetery, and then various cemeteries throughout the county, mainly in the southern end and the eastern end. We don't have much information on these men. About 20 some years ago, I wrote an article called "No Balm in Gilead," and it's about African Americans from Lancaster County in the Civil War. And while I was collecting information for that, I came across letters from a couple men who wrote from the front, African Americans. And one of them was rather humorous. He wrote back to a friend and said, "Get me out of this hell hole." He wanted to come home. But what the church has done is, these are not the burial places of these men. They're actually buried there. These were just put up as a display. Some of the stones there are not legible. They're made with sandstone, and of course acid rain has erased a good bit of it. In the article that I wrote about the church, that was one of my first articles. In there I made a list of the graves that were visible then. But since then I've gone to public records. Up until the 1920s, if you buried someone in the city, you had to get a permit. And so I have a name of probably most of the people who are buried here. As I said, there's about 200 buried in this cemetery. Well, see, some of the men from Lancaster County served in the 54th. And of course, the film Glory is really only an extrapolation, because this idea that they were freed slaves is erroneous. Most of the men in the 54th were free men. And then it's also a misnomer to call them the Massachusetts 54th, since most of the men came from Pennsylvania. So many volunteered to serve in the 54th that they formed a second regiment, the 55th. And if you go through the regimental histories, you can see when they joined and from what area they joined. For example, we were talking about Stephen Swales. Swales joined in Elmira, New York, but he was born in Columbia, worked on the river, which makes perfect sense because Elmira is the beginning of the Susquehanna. And then his journey took him through the military to South Carolina, and then after Reconstruction ended, he eventually moved north and died in Washington, D.C.